Okay, so I know this doesn't mean much coming from me, but I honestly wasn't expecting this show for preschoolers to become my latest obsession. Hello everyone, my name is Caitlin and welcome back to my channel. So, Bluey. I'm sure we are all familiar with this Australian kids show that has somewhat taken the internet by storm. The series follows a family of four, the dad Bandit, the mum Chili, and the two daughters Bluey and Bingo. And as I'm sure you can tell, they are all anthropomorphic dogs as well as the rest of the characters in the series. I was first introduced to this show a few months ago by my friend Emma and just completely fell in love with the show's charm and storytelling capabilities. Numerous episodes feature valuable lessons for both parents and children while also shining a light on the importance of imaginary play throughout childhood. I personally was just blown away by the show's ability to tell such compelling stories in just under 8 minutes, which is why I wanted to make a video about that. So I am a very emotional person, I will preface this video by saying that, but I also don't want that to take away from the ways in which I feel like this show really is able to pull at your heartstrings. So we're going to be going over the top 10 episodes that made me cry today. I think I originally took note of 13 and then narrowed it down to 10 and then ranked them just in order of quality and amount of tears. And not all of these episodes are inherently sad, but I will still probably be putting something in the title like heartbreaking or something that's much more attention grabbing than just like I cry a lot. So that's that. I will say though, I feel like this is a very personal list in some cases. Like I feel like the show does a very good job of tapping into like very specific situations. So of course I would love to know if there are any episodes that I didn't include today that always end up making you emotional. So please leave them in the comments down below. One last thing before we jump right into it, I've only seen all of the episodes up into like mid-season 3 I think, or whatever it is that's available for me to watch on Disney Plus in Canada. I have not seen past that. So if there are any like really great ones that I haven't seen yet, leave them in the comments so that I can get excited to watch them once they're available for me on streaming. But yeah, so with all that being said, let's just jump right into it. So at number 10, we have an episode that might be surprising to the Bluey fans to find out that this episode made me cry, but nonetheless, it is Double Babysitter. So in this episode, Bandit and Chili are going out for the night and Bluey is not happy with the idea of a babysitter put down. Then due to some miscommunication, they end up having two babysitters, their Uncle Rad and then this other girl named Frisky. Then we come to find out that their uncle is single and that Frisky was in a relationship with someone who she loved, but they recently broke up. During bedtime, we learn that the reason why Bluey doesn't like babysitter put-downs is that the last one she had was with their grandmother, and after they went to bed, she had the TV on way too loud and it ended up scaring Bluey. And then this is the kicker for me, ladies and gents. Frisky then goes on to tell Bluey that just because she had one bad experience doesn't mean that they're all going to be bad, and that she needs to continue on and give things another chance or else she'll be stuck in that bad place forever. And so that statement from Frisky, along with what we previously learned about her dating history, really had me resonating with her character. And I think I was just in an emo mood when I watched this episode for the first time because it did not make me cry the second time around, but I do still think it is an important lesson. And I think it can be applied to a variety of things, but like I said, I personally related it to my own dating experiences. Because there were many times where I absolutely hated it and guys sucked and I didn't want to keep going, but if I didn't, then I never would have met my current boyfriend Josh, whom is great and I love very much. And so the episode ends hinting at the two babysitters getting together, and then we find out in the following episode that they actually do, which I feel like just makes this episode even better, which is why it is number 10 on my list. At number 9, we have another episode from season 2. This one is Handstand, and this episode is kind of a simple one, but basically it's Bingo's birthday party and she's trying to do a handstand, but she can't get anybody to watch her. Then we cut to the back porch and we see that Nana Healer is having a similar problem, but instead she's trying to help somebody, but nobody ends up needing her help. And one thing that I love so much about this episode is just how everything is framed. When we're in the kitchen, you have Bingo at the center of it all, with the shot staying in the same place and then characters coming and going from the scene. And I just feel like it does a great job of showing just like the chaos that is a child's birthday party. And then when we cut to the back porch, it's set up the same way, and so we see a different stationary perspective of the household, but this time we have Nana Healer at the center of it. And so she goes inside and sees Bingo's handstand when she was trying to show somebody else, and then she sits down and continues to watch her, showing that she is the perfect person for that job. And I know that this plot sounds so simple, but I feel like we can all remember what it was like to be a kid and just like that feeling about very specific things and just how important they were to you. And then when someone, especially an adult, would take the time to acknowledge that thing, whatever it may be, I just feel like it always meant the world to me. And I feel like this episode is a great example as to how Bluey is able to use music to pull at your heartstrings. Because it's when that song kicks in after the moment between Nana and Bingo and we cut back to the kitchen and we see all that chaos going on now without Bingo at the center of it all, or when that same song kicks in again for the credits, that really triggers the tears for me. And I just feel like this is a great episode. I'm not really too sure if other people will agree with me on that fact, but nonetheless, I just had to include it. Moving on to number 8, we have the second Bluey episode to ever make me cry and also to give me the idea for this video, and that is an episode from season 1 called Yoga Ball. This is another Bingo Bingo-centered episode, and so in this one, she's feeling as though her dad maybe plays a bit too rough with her sometimes. And so we have 3 different instances, I believe, in this episode in which she is playing with Bluey and Bandit, and then she is left feeling a bit uneasy afterwards. And so this ends up bringing her to tears as she goes to comfort herself underneath their tree bench. This is when their mom notices that she's upset, and then they decide to go and talk to Bandit about it. Then we have this great moment in which Bandit is able to turn the situation around and help determine what the right amount of roughness is for when playing with Bingo. And obviously, I feel like this episode kind of speaks for itself. I feel like this is such an important conversation for parents to have with their kids, and I feel like they handled the topic really well. The part that originally brought me to tears was the conversation at the end with Bandit and Bingo, mainly because of the music and just the way that Bandit was able to handle the whole situation. But then on my rewatch, having to see Bingo go and cry under that bench also made me emotional as well. But yeah, it really is just such an important topic to talk about consent and different comfort levels when it comes to different kids, and to encourage them to use their own voice when they are uncomfortable in situations was great to see as well. I just feel like the way in which they handled this situation was so educational for both parents and kids that I guess it just brought me to tears, and so that's why it's number 8. Next up, we have Grandad from season 2, and I feel like this is one that people will definitely understand why it made me emotional. Basically, Chili is taking the girls to visit with her dad, but then when she gets there, she realizes that he's not taking it easy like he should be. The episode continues with the 3 running away from her, and then we end up getting this confession from Chili in which she says that she wants him to be more considerate with the ways in which he treats his body because she wants him to be able to stick around longer as she still needs him in her life. And then by the end of the episode, he ends up taking her advice and having a rest while the girls go swimming. And then the real gut punch comes when the episode ends with Chili and her dad sitting on the dock, and then we have a flashback to them when they were younger. And I feel like this has got to be a universal experience for anyone growing up with grandparents to see their own parent feel as though they're not taking care of themselves in the way that they should. And I feel like this episode does a great job at highlighting that struggle and showing that for kids, it all comes down to their own parents' fear of losing their parent. It's a really great episode, and I feel like, yeah, the tears can be easily explained when it comes to this one. The closer we get to the top of this list, the more I agree with past Caitlin's decisions, because I really do feel like these episodes are just getting better and better. But enough stalling. Up next, we have Promises at number 6. So in this episode, we have both Bluey and Bandit failing to keep their promises, which leads to the whole family agreeing to only make promises that they can keep from now on. This then takes a turn and results in the 2 tricking each other into making promises for their own benefit or entertainment. Chili is then able to put a stop to this and makes a point to explain why promises are so important and that we really wouldn't have anything in this world if we weren't able to trust one another. The family then ends up at the park, and there's this really touching moment where Chili promises to catch Bingo as she jumps down from the monkey bars, and Bluey keeps her promise of going home when asked, even though she would have finally gotten a turn on the zipline. But the real tear-jerking part comes at the very end of this episode when we see Bandit in the girls' room after they've already been put down, and he says that he promises to always love them. And I'm not even watching this scene, like I'm just describing it, and it's almost bringing me to tears once again. It's honestly one of the most touching and memorable moments from the entire series, and I just knew that I had to include it. And I feel like it truly is such a great ending to this episode because we just spent the past like 8 minutes or so learning why promises are so important and what it means to keep your word, which just makes that one line just even more impactful. But like I said, it just gets better from here, so on to number 5. Now, I don't want to get ahead of myself here because there is a whole half of like the 3rd season that I haven't seen yet, and I do really love the episode that I have placed at number 1 on this list, but I honestly do think that this episode has to be one of my absolute favorite Bluey episodes of all time. And it is, of course, season 3, episode 18, Rain. If you're not familiar with this episode, it kind of follows 2 plot lines. Basically, it's a rainy day, and on one hand, you have Bluey, who is trying to create a dam to stop the water from falling down their main path, and on the other, you have Chili, who is trying to stop Bluey from entering their house while she's all wet. The episode continues with the 2 mirroring each other as everything that Bluey tries fails as the water continues to get past her, and everything that Chili tries fails as well, with Bluey continuing to enter the house with the rainwater trailing behind her. But then the episode ends up taking a turn in the end, with Chili realizing what Bluey is trying to do and decides to go help her. But one of the most important parts of this episode that I failed to mention until now is the fact that it is completely silent besides the beginning goodbyes and a sigh from Chili when she realizes what Bluey is trying to do. Instead, this episode is accompanied by a song, which just makes the whole thing hit even harder. Because like I said earlier, the show is just so good at using music to create an emotional reaction from the viewer. And I feel like it does so again here when after we get that sigh from Chili, the song changes. And then I just feel like the lesson in this episode is so important as well, and you can just see the positive impact it has on Bluey right away. Chili taking the time to see just how emotionally invested Bluey is in this little game of hers and putting her own wants aside for hers is just enough to bring me to tears all over again. And the fact that sometimes you just gotta put everything else aside, enjoy the rain, get wet, and play with your kid and worry about everything else later. The end of this episode is perfect as well, with the rain clearing up and the 2 getting to experience this double rainbow together. And then just as they're getting ready to head back inside, we see the rain pick up again and the 2 run back to their spot as it cuts to credits. And like, that is the part that really gets me. And so that's this episode. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. Like I feel like if there's one episode that you end up going and watching after this video, it should be this one, but nonetheless, it's only number 5, so on to number 4. Okay, so next up is a little episode from season 3 called Curry Quest. This episode follows Bandit and Bingo while they're on a quest to Mackenzie's house for a curry swap. And I feel like there's 2 ways in which I could summarize this episode. One would be super detailed as I go over every single plotline, like the face painting and the swooping magpie and all of that, and the other would be to focus on the part that really pulled at my heartstrings, which is the moment where Bingo finds out that her dad is going to be going away on a business trip for 6 weeks. That part just broke me, and I feel like it's the only time in which I've ever questioned Chili and Bandit's parenting in this show. I just can't imagine waiting until the day before you're supposed to leave to tell your child that you're going to be gone for such a long time. But I'm also not a parent, and I understand that this episode was a reference to kids whose parents are in the military, and if I'm not mistaken, sometimes that information as to how long they're going to be gone for and when they're leaving doesn't end up coming until the very last minute. But the episode continues with the family dropping Bandit off at the airport the following day, and then we get a time lapse of the family's time at home with Bandit being gone. And then of course the episode ends with them all reuniting back at the airport. And so obviously it was the music once again that accompanied the time lapse that really got me. But it was also just such an emotional moment to see the time passing and their lives continuing on with this new adjustment. To see them crossing the park without him, Bluey continuing her scarf, the empty seat at the dinner table, it was a lot, and I feel like it just really made those tears flow. Something else I really liked about this episode though as an English minor is that it demonstrated the steps in the hero's journey perfectly. And Chili narrating each step I feel like was done really well, especially when you realize that the whole episode is a reference to military parents. I feel like if I was able to relate to this episode more, like if I grew up with a parent who was always traveling or something like that, then this episode could have easily been like number 2 on this list. And so I'm glad that kids today who are experiencing this, or those who grew up with this being their reality, now have this episode to reflect that. So speaking of episodes that people resonate with, this next one hits very close to home for me as it is Bumpy and the Wise Old Wolfhound. Now this episode is another one that just has to be one of my favorite episodes of all time. Basically, Bingo is at the hospital and Bluey, along with the rest of the Healer fam, have recorded a home movie for her. It tells the story of Bluey's character who wants a dog, but then once she finally gets one, it ends up getting sick. She tries everything she can to cure it, but ends up learning the lesson that she should instead just enjoy the time that they have together instead of spending it stressing over her illness. Now, when I was a little girl, my younger sister Carrie was very sick to the point where she was also in the hospital for months, and there was many times in which we also thought she wasn't going to make it. I couldn't have been more than 8 at the time, and yet I still remember how scary that feeling was, and I feel like an episode like this would have really helped me and my younger brother John especially. And so when I watched this episode and got to the end where the family was all lined up and waving, saying, "See you tomorrow, Bingo," like that was the part that really got me, and I feel like it's gonna get me again just by talking about it. But it's not just that, this episode also manages to be one of the funniest ones. Like I love when the kids make up their own little names and the games that they play, and Muffin, who usually ends up annoying me, I actually found to be really enjoyable in this episode. There's also the fact that I too would make little home movies with my cousin growing up that I felt like had me resonating with this episode even more, and so yeah, I love this one. I feel like this is another one that every Bluey fan needs to watch because it is just so good. Moving on, we have an episode that I'm sure a lot of you have been waiting for, and that is, of course, Baby Race. And this episode was actually one of the first ones that I ever saw, and I'm really grateful for that because I'm not too sure I would have cared to continue watching this series otherwise. Just in case you're not familiar, although I highly doubt it, in this episode you have Chili telling the story of how Bluey first learned to walk and how she got competitive about it with the other moms. But then after a talk with Coco's mom, who she learns is the mother of 9, she comes to the understanding that it's not a competition and that she should just be taking things at her own pace. And so she does. She embraces Bluey and all of her quirks, and then by the end of the episode, she ends up taking her first steps in the kitchen so that she can get to her mom. And it's like this episode already had me in tears because of that scene between Chili and Coco's mom, especially in the moment where she tells her that she's doing great. And then when we see Bluey take her first steps and we have that voiceover with Bingo saying she must have seen something that she really wanted, like that's when the waterworks really start. And again, the soundtrack in this episode is so spot on. I also love seeing all of Bluey's friends as babies and learning that Snickers was basically born with his hat on. And not to mention, it is just such a great lesson, especially for new parents, that things are going to happen when they happen. It's not a competition or a race, just let your kids go at their own speed. Such a beautiful episode, definitely one of the best ones hands down, and it was a very close call between this one and number 1, but ultimately I decided to have number 1 at number 1, and so with all that being said, let's move on to that. So the number 1 Bluey episode that makes me cry, that I feel like is the best out of all of these, has to be Camping from season 1. So while out camping with her family, Bluey makes this new friend, Jean-Luc, who only speaks French. The two end up playing together for days in a row despite not being able to communicate in the way that you'd expect. But the episode ends up taking a turn once Jean-Luc's family ends up leaving before Bluey's. Jean-Luc tries to communicate this to Bluey, but obviously because of the language barrier, Bluey isn't able to understand, and so she wakes up the next day expecting to play with Jean-Luc once again, but only to find out that he is already gone. Then after a conversation with her mom, Bluey learns the lesson that sometimes people will come into our lives only for a little while, and instead of focusing on being sad that they're gone, you should instead focus on the happy times that you spent together. And then we have this beautiful moment with them taking in the night sky together that just makes me bawl. But the tears don't stop there, as the episode then ends with a flash forward where we see Bluey as like a young teen returning to the same campground, and her and Jean-Luc meet once again. And I feel like I definitely have a strong attachment to this episode, as one of my best friends, the one I mentioned at the beginning of this video, Emma, is a long distance best friend, and so I just heavily resonated with this whole plotline. And like, I was familiar with this episode beforehand because I know that there's a playset that goes along with it and all of that, but I still feel like nothing could have prepared me for just how good it was. I feel like it's another one that just has to be like in the top 10 best Bluey episodes of all time, and like I said, I know I haven't finished season 3 and I'm sure we will get more seasons to come as it is a very successful series, but nonetheless, I do still feel like this episode will forever remain one of the most iconic and memorable ones. And obviously it does beg the question as to if I would ship Bluey and Jean-Luc at some point in the future, and to that I say, sure, why not? I'm sure that they would make a great childhood friends to lovers story, and I can guarantee that there is probably like 10 fanfics about that already. Some other fun facts about this episode is that I feel like Jean-Luc's family might be French-Canadian, but this is solely based on the fact that the syrup that they have on their table has a maple leaf on it, but nonetheless, that is canon as far as I'm concerned. Also, if you play this episode with the French dub, then Jean-Luc speaks English, which I think is really neat. But yes, that is my top 10 Bluey episodes that make me cry, but I want to know which Bluey episodes make you cry, even if I didn't include them on this list. Please leave them in the comments down below. I feel like some honorable mentions would be Butterflies, The Show, Fairy Tale is another one that gets me. But yeah, I want to know which episodes make you cry, so please leave them down below. I can't wait to read all about it. Anyways, Cater Tots, that is Lifesaver today. I hope you'll have a wonderful day, and I'll talk to you very, very soon. I guess if you guys would like to see me cover like my top 10 favorite episodes, I could do that as well, or just what I think are the top 10 best, maybe. Who knows? If you guys are interested in that, please leave it in the comments. But yeah. That's all from me. I'm sad Bluey's over, but I do feel like it is one of those shows where I could watch it again and gain something new from it. Like, their episodes are all so good. I'm so obsessed. Or if you guys would like to see me talk about any of the merch, because I do have some merch as well. But yes, I don't know. I guess I'll see what the response is to Bluey and how much you guys care. Sound good? All right, cool. I'll talk to you guys next time. I was gonna say next week, but I don't think I'll be posting next week because my next video I have planned is kind of long. So I'll see you guys in 2 weeks' time. Bye. Love you.